Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're going to be talking about wintertime fishing once again. We've done a lot of content recently talking about wintertime tactics and locations, and we're going to just keep on talking about that because it's wintertime and a lot of you want to know how to catch more fish during the wintertime. So in this video, we're going to talk about 3 different locations that I like to look for on pretty much any reservoir, okay? No matter if it's lowland, highland, canyon reservoir, any of those reservoirs will do, and they should have some of these ingredients to look for, and it seems to work pretty much everywhere. Now, the reason why I also make the distinction of a reservoir is because natural lakes and like tidal fisheries, not quite the same. So you can find some of these ingredients on both of those, but they don't really set up exactly the same. The fish kind of focus on different areas. So I'm not saying you can't use these locations, but it's not going to be quite as all right, but before we get into those 3 different locations, I've got to mention we've got merchandise in the store. The store is either, you're going to see it below the video here or on the side, but I get asked all the time, how can I support the channel? We love the content you're doing. How can we support you? And first off, just liking, sharing, subscribing, and commenting on these videos is a great way to support the channel. But if you want another way to support this channel, definitely check out the merchandise that I have. I'm wearing one right now. We just got this in the mail. I got one for myself and my wife. I got a red one, obviously. She got a blue one. There's a bunch of different colors on there, and we've got t-shirts, all kinds of hoodies, hats, stickers, stuff like that. So that's an awesome way to support the channel. I'd love to see you guys walking around in your sonar fishing gear. And we're coming up with some new designs as well. So I'm excited to put those on the store as well. One thing I will say, just so you know, when you go to order. So I got the red one here. The one thing I noticed was that there's a little bit of red that shows through the white part of the logo. I think it's just because red's so bright. It's not the same with the blue sweatshirt. So I think that this one, just the red kind of shows up a little bit through the white, but it still looks great. But anyways, let's move on. Let's talk about 3 locations that you want to be looking for on your reservoir that you're going to be fishing. So let's go ahead and turn on the screen record. And there we go. We're recording. So we're going to be using Lake Chickamauga as our example here, our model. Because I live on Lake Chickamauga. I know it pretty well, and I know where all these ingredients are. So the first area that I like to look for, we kind of need to set up the scenario. So this first area is kind of the beginning of wintertime, and what I look for during that beginning period. Anywhere December, maybe early January, this is going to be a big key. Also, late November. So late November through December and into like the first part of January, these are locations that are going to work. But essentially what I'm looking for when I'm looking for these areas is I'm looking for areas that are likely holding the biggest population of threadfin shad. Threadfins are a huge part of the food chain for bass, and especially this time of year, there's something that happened earlier in the year in September and October where those shad in all these lakes, they move into the backs of the creeks where the fresh water's coming in and it's a little bit cooler, and they're back there in the shallow water at the mouths of those creeks, and then as the water gets colder, they start making their way back. So let's look at this creek right here. So this creek right here, very popular creek in Chickamauga, the shad end up coming back here and being right where this creek enters the back here. This is Sail Creek. And so I'm just using this as a hypothetical because I didn't fish this creek during September and October, but I can pretty much tell you that this transition happened, this migration of shad. So the shad get back here in the fall, early fall, September, October time period, and they hang back here in the shallow flat for quite a while. You can go back there. It's an awesome pattern to go target fish in real shallow water that are chasing those shad. They're very hungry. But as it starts getting really cold, those fish start making their way back out towards the main lake. So the main lake is over here, and they start making their way back. But see, out here, in this area isn't like the perfect example because it's got some deep water right here. But just assume that this backwater right here that we're looking at is really shallow. That's where they'll be hanging out in September and October. But when you start getting those like nights that get close to freezing, they start making their way back out. They follow the main river channel, and they get to a part in these creeks, and it could be, mid creek, it could be closer to the mouth of the creek, but they're going to find an area that has deep water access like this right here. And this is an area that I recently fished. Deep water access, and it's very protected from the elements. So there's not a lot of real heavy wind that affects the area, which during the wintertime is a big deal because it cools the water faster. A cold wind can really drop the temperatures of the water very quickly. So, finding an area that is protected but still has a deep water access is very important for the shad because they're very susceptible to dying off when they're stunned by drastic temperature changes. And so they end up hanging out in areas like this, deep water access areas, which on Chickamauga are these big bays and basin areas in the creeks. And so if you got like anywhere from 10 to 25 feet of water, that's exactly what we're looking for. And those shad, they stay in these big giant schools, and they just kind of meander around these deep water areas, these big basins and bays. Same thing goes for areas like Chester Frost. We'll go down here. Chester Frost is the same thing. They kind of hang out right here. Harrison Bay, they have all of this area out here. And this is one of my favorite places to target these fish, and they'll still get shallow too. Like I've been out on Chickamauga and caught them really good back in the shallower areas around these shoals. But it's really important for the shad to have those deep water areas to where they can escape the really, really cold weather if they need to. So you've got these deep water areas, these basins, and really it's really cool targeting fish in these type of areas, but it's also very frustrating too, especially if you don't have good electronics, because essentially the fish that are focused in on chasing these shad, they tend to be suspending a lot. So you really, to be efficient and effective catching these fish, you have to have 2D sonar or forward-facing sonar. If you have it, is the best way to target them. But they're going to be suspended, and they're not going to really be relating to any specific type of structure. A lot of times they're just kind of roaming around and picking off those shad. So this is a pattern that I really, really like. Now, if you're finding that the shad are in shallow water, you start seeing seagulls diving around in shallower water. Like I mentioned here in Chester Frost, like I've caught a ton of fish in this shallow area over here, especially if there's still a little bit of grass remaining, in any of the lakes. Again, these are general statements that you can apply to a lot of different lakes, but I'm using my experience on Chick just as reference. But you can get shallow, this time of year and catch them. I catch them on the Z-Man minnows a lot this time of year, just fan casting around these flats. So these big wide basin areas with deep water access are one big key. Now, continuing on with this fall transition, here we've got Saudi Creek. So like what I was just talking about, these basin areas right here with deep water access, this is where the shad are going to hang out for a while. But as they start making their way back out, they start hitting these channel swing banks. So these steep, bluffy banks. These are the next type of area that I look for this time of year is if you look at the map and you start following the shad migration out closer and closer to the main lake, you start getting to these channel swing banks where you have very sharp drops. And the steeper the drop, the better during the wintertime. So as we get more, the fish get more set into the winter patterns, the fall turnover has completely finished, and the temperatures are pretty much at their lowest for the year. Steep structure is super important. Okay, so bluff banks, anything from just a straight drop to like a 45-degree bank, whatever the steepest banks are in an area, which usually correspond with a channel swinging in closest to the bank, those are going to be really good. So, and the reason why steep structure is really good this time of year is because bass don't want to expend a lot of energy. Okay, and so if they're living on a flat, for them to get shallow, they have to expend a ton of energy to go from deep to shallow because it's a longer distance. The structure, the bottom is tapering more. But with bluffy banks, all those fish have to do is on a straight bluff, if they want to go to 1 foot of water, all they have to do is, if they're in 20 foot of water, they just have to swim 20 feet and they're already there. They can go up on a sunny day and sun themselves, hang around some of the crevices right by the surface, that sort of thing. So steep structure just allows those fish to make very small depth changes, or go a shorter distance and make big depth changes. So the opposite of what I was about to say. So bluff banks are really good. Usually the areas that you want to focus on with bluff banks are going to be the bluff ends, what we call bluff ends. So where the channel first meets the bluff is going to be key. So you go from kind of more tapering structure like you have here, tapering bottom contour, to steep. That is going to be the key location. And on both ends, that's going to be the key location. So like right here and right here is where you're really going to want to pay attention to. But there's always a good hot spot in the middle somewhere. There may be multiple ones. But those two areas are going to be the keys, is those bluff ends. All right, so bluffs are a big deal this time of year as well. All right, so the next location that you really want to look for this time of year is really less of a location and more of a type of structure that you want to look for, a structural ingredient that is really important, and that is rock transitions. Rocks are very important this time of year because most of these lakes don't really have that much grass left. And if you do have grass, let's throw out a bonus and add, whatever remaining hydrilla or milfoil you have, that's also going to play a big role. So if you see some grass on your graph and there's not a lot of it around the lake, that's going to be 100% an area you want to check out. So that's a bonus. But really, there's a lot of lakes that I go to, like Dale Hollow or any of these Tennessee reservoirs, Norris and places like that, where rock transitions are very, very important. And what I mean by rock transitions is, whenever you have one type of rock that all of a sudden ends, and then another type of rock, whether it's a type of rock or a size class of rock, begins. So those rock transitions are super important, and the more dramatic the transition, usually the better. So if you go from like tiny little fine clay a bank, and then you all of a sudden have a vein of shale, that's going to be a really big deal. And in fact, I've had really good fishing experiences on places like Douglas Lake, which I don't have downloaded here, Douglas Lake is a really good example of rock transitions being very important, because I've got some areas on Douglas, and I don't have the contours here yet, but if you find those rock transitions on like main lake points or close to main lake points, those sort of thing, like right here, I've caught fish in this kind of area right here. There's like some rocky shale transitions. This is going to be a key location for you. Rock is really important for fish during the wintertime, because one of the most important prey species during the winter, the later winter time, is crawfish. And obviously crawfish love living around rocks, because there's all kinds of places for them to hide in those rocks. And so whenever I am targeting these transition banks, these rocky banks, and it doesn't even have to be like on a specific type of structure like this point here, like this main lake point. It could just even be, a bank, a straight bank where you've got some, you've got pretty much a consistent combination of rock, and then all of a sudden it meets a stark transition. It could just be a straight bank, a 45-degree bank. They'll still use that. It's just something different. It may not be as high percentage as, say, a perfect rock transition on a May Lake point, but it's still going to hold some fish most of the time. So whenever I'm faced with those rock transitions, really big key is targeting those with a jig and a crankbait. Those are two of the best baits that you can throw. You can throw in a Ned rig too. Those will all work, but make sure that you're using crawfish patterns. That seems to be a really, really big key. Not going to say you can't catch them on shad pattern stuff, but if you really want to maximize your success on rock transition areas, crawfish patterns are definitely going to do the trick. So something like a DT6, as far as a crankbait, a rock crawler, and then throwing a football jig or just a regular casting jig is a big deal. And that area right there that I just showed, I'll just throw that one out there. Sorry to those people that like fishing that spot on Douglas, but I've caught a lot of fish there. But anyways, those are the three locations. Really, it goes from early December, looking for those suspending and roaming bass that are still chasing those giant schools of shad that previously were in the backs of the creeks, and they're kind of focusing in those big basin areas with deep water access. That's where I start, and then I start making my way out of those major creeks and start hitting those bluffy banks, those channel swing banks. And then after that, I really start focusing in on those rock transition areas. Not saying that you can't fish the rock transitions earlier, because they're always going to play a role, especially on lakes that just have rocks. But that's kind of the succession that I go in the wintertime, because I know that they're going to be in the basins early, then they're going to hit those channel swing banks, and then I can find them in pretty much any part of the lake on those rock transitions, especially if it's main lake or close to the main lake in those creeks. So anyways, guys, just figured I'd throw out some information on these three areas during the wintertime. It has really served me well. Obviously, there's more places you can catch bass during the wintertime, but these are surefire areas that you need to check out to catch more fish. So thank you guys so much for watching. Again, check out the merchandise below or on the side. We got a lot of great stuff, and thank you guys so much for taking time to watch this video. Make sure you like, share, subscribe. I'll see you out on the water. Trust the process.